if you want to use the word antihypertensive, FDA have a criterion. It must lower blood pressure. If you want to use the word antidepressant, they have a criterion, which is it must lower a rating scale score. It's not keep you alive. It's not save lives. It's almost nothing that goes through FDA that saves lives.
Really?
Yeah. There are more people die on antidepressants in the trials submitted to FDA and antipsychotics than die on placebo.
And you're saying that a lot of that, the reason that's happening, a big piece of the reason that's happening is the way that people die. It's like what you said with the SSRIs and depression. It's like, oh, they committed suicide. Well, that was because of their depression, not because of the medication for the depression.
Well, that's the way the company can play things afterwards. FDA are just bureaucrats. Their job is not to think.
Yeah.
It's to make sure that when things go wrong, we have a paperwork trail that means you can't shoot us. You can't take us out and shoot us,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow. And so how much, like, what can you tell me about, so let's just assume that my listeners have a basic idea of the biopharmaceutical pipeline, right? You have to do preclinical research, you've got a drug candidate, then you do your phase 1, 2, 3 trials and so forth. You eventually get approval. The what we're led to believe is that if something is an approved drug, the science is rock solid, the clinical trial results all looked good, and sort of all of the results were analyzed. What can you start to tell us about how the data is sort of massaged along the way, how certain pieces of evidence are maybe left out that aren't even analyzed, such that it looks like all of the evidence looks good and you tick all the boxes at the FDA and then you get approval, but in fact, all the evidence was not even looked at in some cases.
yeah. In what you need to appreciate, I think, is that the studies companies do to get a license are essentially assays. They're not randomized controlled trials. They're randomized and they're controlled that way, but they're assays rather than trials done to inform clinical practice. And as I say, they get the paperwork into FDA who don't check if all the people in this trial uh, um, actually existed or not. Okay. Uh, if you were FDA and really working hard at the job, you'd imagine, you'd look at the paperwork and, you'd notice, hey, this guy in this trial died from burns. Well, if you're just working through the paperwork, you can say, people die from burns. You have accidents that happen in any group of a few hundred people. The companies are supposed to write an account which gives the person in FDA a bit more detail if a patient has died from burns or has ended up going into hospital for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the Pfizer trials, I should probably hop back and just introduce this note for you, okay? When Zoloft launched in the UK, I chaired one of the launch meetings for Pfizer, okay? Um, that was at a point before I knew what I'm going to tell you next,
Mm-hmm.
okay? But at the launch meeting, I thought, what I what I'm what I'd say is, look, this group of drugs are new, and the serotonin system is pretty primitive, and we're going to learn things by using these drugs that we didn't ever know before. And I thought this seemed to be a reasonable thing to be saying. It's going to be exciting. Life is going to be fun. We're going to see new things, which will kind of provide the basis for new drugs. This was just after Viagra had been discovered by Pfizer, by a bunch of people who, when Pfizer thought the trial didn't work all that well for heart problems, a bunch of guys weren't happy to give the drugs back because they noticed it was doing something interesting for them.
Yeah.
So I was trying to play on that theme. Things could be interesting here. We're going to see things we haven't ever seen before. But anyway, um, FDA aren't looking at it like this. What is there in this dossier that's going to tell me things I didn't know about medicine beforehand? Okay. Um, so you've got guy dies from burns in a Pfizer trial. And when things like this happen, the company are supposed to write things up to explain a bit more. Okay. Uh, it looks pretty clear that FDA didn't look closely at the whole thing. They just said, oh, death by burns. When you read the account of what happened, you find this guy became agitated on one of the drugs and wanted to kill himself and poured gasoline over himself and set fire to it.
Hmm.
But he only died 5 days later
Wow.
and gets coded as death by burns rather than death by suicide.
Wow.
Now, that's the kind of thing that should be happening. And if people in FDA were awake, they'd be reading these things and saying, hey, wait a minute here, I need to get hold of this guy's wife and get a little bit more from her about what went on. But they
Hmm.
don't have the contact details for people. Actually, I've got a great story I can tell you
Yeah.
about that. But anyway, let me just add one more thing in first, which is in theory, Pfizer have to, write an account of what happened to this man who died from burns. But around the time he died from burns, they realized, there's other things we can do. And not just them, but all of the companies realize, you know, if we've got a kid going on an SSRI, as one kid actually down in Texas going on Paxil, a week or two later, he's out in the street waving a gun around, threatening to kill people. So he gets picked up by the police and gets brought to hospital. So there should be an account of what happened. There isn't.